Hey, hey, it's Matt Wallace.
Hey.
This is Music Quest, and you've already heard a little bit of there she is, Anna Tyrrell. She is a friend of ours, a musician, and we are delighted to be interviewing her today. It is May the 31st, and it's middle of the afternoon here in Texas. What time is it there with you, Anna?
Well, here in the UK, it's 8 in the evening.
And is it a nice day?
Well, it's been lovely, actually. Finally, the sun's come out, so we've had a pretty sunny one today.
Well, fantastic. What's like? How hot does it get? I mean, where are you? You're in southern England, correct?
That's right. I live right on the coast. Actually, I live right by the beach. So you leave from the coast where I live, and you end up in France if you keep going. So yeah, it's a lovely part of the country. Tends to be warm, but we've had such a cold, wet spring. It's just gone on forever. So I would say like this weekend was the beginning of a little bit of sunshine. So it's around 23 degrees today. Nothing compared to Texas, but but it's pretty good after the winter we've had.
Well, I'm glad that you're having nice weather. It's Texas just seems to be extreme. It's actually been kind of pleasant the last couple of days, but schedules always seem to work out where I can't be outside when it's nice, and when I want to go outside, it's not as nice. But yeah, whatever. We're not here to talk about the weather, even though that does help people get some idea where you're located, which is a good thing. And so I met Anna years ago, and okay, let's just stop. Anna, would you like to tell people why we know each other and why? I'd like to hear your story of that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I was racking my brains earlier and thinking, gosh, which year was it? So you'll have to chip in with that. Was it 2003?
I am fairly. We arrived 10 days before 9/11, so it was 2001.
Oh gosh. No way. Okay, so it's even longer ago. Okay, that's great. So I had arrived in Denia in Alicante province. So that's on the east coast of Spain, by the Mediterranean Sea. Beautiful small fishing town. And there was there still is, a Christian school there. And so I started work there in late August 2000, so just a year before you all came over, and I was teaching English and music at the school. So I guess we met through the children were at the school with us there, and I think they were pretty happy to have a native English speaker to converse with. And obviously,
apologies. I have decided that I want to change something real quick. I am going to get some headphones on.
Okay.
I'm trying to keep the audio cleaner, and I want to make sure that our audio tracks are not recording one another. So,
okay,
you did the right thing. You had the headphones on. I didn't. That was mine. So it's no big deal. I don't think it's making that big a difference. But yes, that is where we. It was in Spain. You taught my children music.
Yeah.
Yep.
And obviously
you did a good job.
Thank you. Well, their English was pretty good already, but maybe I helped a bit with the Spanish, who knows. Yeah. But yeah, so we also had quite a lot to do with each other in the church, particularly with Miriam being part of the worship group that I was really involved with. And I think we just, as all expats, as we would say over here, just living in Spain, getting used to the Spanish culture, the familiar things and the not so familiar things. I guess we had some common ground in terms of, the things that we found strange in the culture and the things we could get on board with. And
you had been there how long again? Did you say how?
So I'd been living in Denia for a year, I guess, when you came.
Right.
I'd done a prior year, 2 years before I'd gone out. So I just finished my undergraduate studies, my bachelor's degree. at university. And so 98, 99, I was out there for a year in another town called Gandia, just a little further up the coast.
Right. I remember that town.
Yeah. Then I came back to the UK for 1 year, and then I got this job in Denia. So yeah, so that was a big chunk of life there.
So when we arrived, you had been there 1 year, and yet it really felt you knew what was going on much better than we did. Yeah, I think you picked up on it. I mean, I guess a year should make a difference. So it's, like I said, we can talk about whatever we want. Like I said, it's Music Quest, but let's talk a little culture. A couple of things that we experienced that I'd like to hear your comment on in retrospect is that things were constantly happening in general culture, in the neighborhood, in the city, that everybody just knew were happening. But there was no notification. There was no posters. It was just everybody knew that on this day we do this thing, and nobody around us ever seemed interested in letting us know what everybody knew. And so, did you experience that as well?
I think I had a bit of a shock my first year out in that area. So I should just clarify that my mum is Spanish. My mum's Catalan, and she's from Barcelona. So I'd grown up, with family in Spain and having quite a lot of experiences, spending the summers there. And, so I arrived in Denia with, some kind of cultural knowledge already. But what I discovered in Denia in particular was, I think Denia still has the fame of being the town in Spain that has assimilated more fiestas. So the fiestas are specific kind of celebrations or cultural traditions that take place. And Denia's main one, I guess their main festivals are in the summer period. And there's something called Bulls a la Mar, which is like, it's not bullfighting, it's kind of like bulls running or cows running through the streets and jumping into the sea, which sounds really bizarre, but that was one of the big
hold it. You skipped over something there. You just kind of glossed over and said, that sounds a little bizarre. No, it actually is pretty bizarre. You just you were there long enough where it seemed normal. But I mean, for everybody who might have missed that, you've got the running of the bulls. It's a Pamplona, right? So
that's right. Yeah,
it's that idea. So other places do that as well. So they do a version of that in Denia, but then they create this arena right on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. They build up the stands, and then there's an arena, and they get the bulls in the middle of that, and one edge of it is the Mediterranean Sea. And so to win, I use this win, air quotes, you get a bull to chase you into the sea. And if you can do that without it killing you, you win. Did I describe that okay?
I think that sounds fair. I'm just going to qualify that I never partook. So I've seen this as a spectator, but I was not running in front of any cows or bulls. I mean, they are mostly cows. I'm going to clarify, they're not bulls. Okay. And they always have the biggest one is like the tame one that kind of, when it gets a bit too frenetic, they bring out the big cow, and all the young heifers, I guess, are then more relaxed and follow her. And so, but I'd never seen a cow swim before, but my goodness, these cows can swim, and they were floating. I was just blown away. But that's one of the festivals they have there. Yeah, I guess another really important one is Fallas, which is just like, it's mainly from Valencia, but again, it's made it to Denia. So Fallas are gigantic paper mache statues. People spend thousands of dollars, I would say, hundreds of thousands of dollars, planning and preparing these. And they're like huge political caricatures, or they illustrate something of historic significance. But there's other aspects to it. So you have to wear these special costumes. So the people that are involved are called falleros and falleras. So the women have to wear these massive kind of brocade dresses, which are, I guess, sort of 18th century, I suppose, that kind of look. And they have the kind of the Princess Leia buns on the side and all these kind of intricate plait work and combs and gold bling, and then lots of pearls. And it's quite a spectacle. So there's a whole uniform. The guy's uniform is a bit more chilled, but it's kind of like, I guess, more of a 18th century, I don't know, breeches and a jacket, embroidered jacket, something like that, and a shirt. But the women's costumes are spectacular. So you have those people that accompany this paper mache statue. Then you get poems written and like political satire. And so they do a competition to judge which is the best falla, like in terms of the poetry, in terms of the kind of aesthetic, and in terms of the best dress, the most lavish and whatever. And then after a couple of days up in the street, they burn them down. They literally raze them to the ground. And the fun of that is that everyone stands around shouting abuse at the firefighters who are trying to keep all the buildings from setting alight. So that's pretty crazy, isn't it?
We have video. These competitions between the neighborhoods, these massive fallas are built, but then they have the infantile or whatever, the small versions. They actually built two of them, and we have video of the one near our house when it was burning. They shoot these massive rockets at them. They're like going, and they're all lined up to go straight up, okay? Because you're in these canyons of buildings. Well, ours, when it burned, it fell over to the side. So these Roman candles or whatever they were shooting out of this thing is now pointing right at the building next to it. And it's just pummeling this building with fire. And the firemen are trying to keep the whole place from going up. And it's crazy. It's an event. Yeah,
that's part of the experience. The other accompanying feature is, fireworks, but we're not just, or pyrotechnics. We're not just talking, pretty fireworks with the colored lights and stuff. We're talking huge bangers. I don't know what you call them in the States, but here we would say bangers. They're just like that. All these fireworks do is make an enormous ear-splitting noise. And they do one to wake you up. So I guess about 8 a.m. They do like a mid-morning one. They do an after lunch one. And then they do another one in the evening. And on the last day, there's just like huge amounts of these things. At the same time, you have like a marching wind band. So it's brass. Yeah, brass and woodwind. Yeah, wind band. And they're trying to outcompete these bangers. I mean, it's kind of a feast for all the senses, because you can just smell burnt stuff around. You see all these colorful dresses and you hear this almighty, bangs going off everywhere. But that's in March. I mean, I'm thinking from September. There's so much else going on, isn't there? There's like Denia has another festival, or somewhere near the school. It's some kind of patron saint. So like a procession with lanterns. That's what I'm saying. Denia's just it's just assimilated traditions from other parts of Spain, and they've just said, yeah, we're on board with that. So I mean, there's something like more fiestas per capita in that town than anywhere else in Spain, which is quite crazy. And I guess it was my second year by the time you all arrived. So, I'd probably been through that cycle once. And yeah, maybe that's why it didn't shock me as much as it shocked you.
It just seemed like every time you turned around, there was some new festival, some holiday, something that was happening.
Yeah.
And if you didn't know what was happening, you didn't know how to prepare. You didn't know what was going on. You wondered where everybody was. I remember one time our car got towed because we had parked it where we always park it, and everybody's like, "Oh no! This day every year you have to pull your car off the street or they're going to tow it." And we're like, "All right, but where's our car?" And so it was always interesting how little heads up one would be given. That's how it works. You have to figure it out. But like I said, you always felt like a local to us, but it's relative, I guess.
I mean, I think I ended up spending nearly 9 years living in Denia. By the end, I really, felt that, that was and I still feel it's been a significant part of my adulthood and a big part of my identity. And I got to go back and visit recently for the first time since before the pandemic. So several years before the pandemic, I hadn't been. And that was so lovely to go back. It's a beautiful part of the world. There's a lovely mountain. There's just this gorgeous sea, long sandy beaches. And I'm so glad that, we're talking more than 20 years since I first went out there. I can still call it home. I can still say those are my friends.
Right.
But I would say it took me a while. I didn't feel that immediately.
Right. There was a book that I think was written not far from there called Spanish Lessons. Is that the book? It was It was an English author who came to live in Spain, and he wrote, and it was about his experiences assimilating into Spanish culture. So that was something that really stuck out. The other one and it's the same thing, but more personalized, is that I remember we would try to instigate parties or get-togethers or whatever, and we would tell people about it like 2 and 3 weeks ahead so they could get it on their calendar, right? And that was just a useless act. And people would have these major events, and they would let everybody know about it less than 24 hours from when the event was happening. And somehow or another, people all would show up. And it was a rhythm thing that was so counter to the way we run our schedules. So I know you experienced that. So as a Brit living in England, did you have to adjust, or the British, as free with their calendars as the Spaniards? I can't remember.
Oh no! I mean, the phrase I kept hearing from people was like puntualidad inglesa, English punctuality, because I was always too early for things. I kept turning up too early. And, by nature, I am not a really punctual person. I really believe in, I really respect my work schedule. And if I have to be somewhere for work, then I'll make sure I'm there on time. But, with my leisure time, I'm kind of infamous for being a bit more casual about that. But I don't know if that happened before Spain or that was just because of Spain. I definitely had to adapt. I think the thing is, when you live in the kind of society which is still pretty normal in those smaller towns in Spain nowadays, it's all around family life. So, a baby's born, so you've got the christening or whatever, you've got that's a big celebration. You've got the first communion, if they're Catholic, around 8-9 years old. You've got weddings, obviously. You've got funerals, whatever, and everything is done around the family. So everyone has to drop everything when there's a family celebration happening. On top of that, most weekends, young people go back home. They spend the weekend. If they're away studying, they'll come home every weekend. That really shocked me in the UK when I moved out of my my family home to go to university, I was like, oh, I'll see you in a few months. I mean, I did come home in the holidays and stuff, but I certainly wouldn't have traveled every weekend. Um, and it's just not like that in Spain. So if you're always around your family all the time and you just know that's your day-to-day routine, I guess you don't need too much advanced planning for the other stuff. Um, yeah, I don't know. I remember so many things where they were like, oh, don't be too British about this. Oh, don't be too, don't be too English. um, you're expecting something that's never going to happen here. People aren't going to do this. They're not going to arrive at that time, or they're not going to, or they're going to argue back with you about this and that. And that's just all goodwill. Or, yeah, I don't know.
It's an international phenomenon that has its own flavor no matter where you are. But I do remember, I mean, that our time there was very educational, and it stretches you on like you start realizing what parts of your culture you take for granted and that do not match what other people do. And so, like I said, you always felt like a local to us, but once again, it's cool. So I apologize for dragging everybody through our recollections of Spain, but it was a good thing. There's tons we can talk about Spain. If you guys want to ask any questions in chat or anything like that, you go ahead. But I can't get the overlays to work. I've got some really nice comments here in the chat that for some reason, the thing that lets you see them, Anna, is not working properly. So I apologize for that. We'll see if I can figure that out later, but probably not now. But it's stuff like she's not aged. She's a lovely person. There's a whole bunch of things. So let's talk some music now. We're not going to run away from Spain. Like I said, I know you did music before you got to Spain, and you've done lots of music after you. But while you were there, you played in the church group, but you also were involved there at the school. Tell people your first love, instrument-wise, and just a little bit about your music background, if you don't mind. However you want to approach that. I'd love people to know you as a musician as well, other than our friend.
Yeah. So violin's my main instrument, my first study. And I started violin when I was at primary school. So here in the UK, less nowadays, but when I was a child, it was really common for children to try learning an instrument at school, just in regular public school. And, the lessons were subsidized, so you could learn, and they used to kind of hire out the instruments reasonably affordably. So it was something that was possible to do. So I was like 8.5 when I started learning the violin. And the reason that I chose the violin was a local violinist came into my school assembly, like the kind of gathering that we have first thing in the morning. And he says, oh, my name's Tim. I play this instrument called the violin, and I'd like to play you some pieces on the violin. And he proceeded to play from memory Vivaldi's Four Seasons. And I was just mesmerized. I thought, wow. Can you imagine, that you can do that with a human being, can make that sort of sound just using a bit of wood, and I remember just being absolutely fascinated. And but they were offering the lessons to the year above me, and believe it or not, I was actually really shy when I was a child. So I was like, oh, I better not go and ask about lessons, because it's not my turn this year. So I waited a whole year to then sign up for the lessons the following year. And I started learning with a group of 3 of us at school with a teacher. So we had like 20 minutes lesson a week or something like that. And, borrowed these instruments from school. And I began to progress. And then my violin teacher was moving from the school, and he knew that we were going to be moving as a family. So at that time, I was living in another part of the south coast of England called Sussex. and we were going to be moving to the area close to where I live right now, which is a county called Dorset, which is further west. And so he approached my parents and said, well, I don't think it would be so good for Anna to have a new teacher at school for a few weeks and then to move away and have a different teacher. Can we come to some arrangement where I come to your house and do some private tuition? So they were able to make that happen. So for a few months, I had some individual lessons with him. In the meantime, a friend of my mum's knew that I was really into music and I was making good progress with the violin, but she knew that I liked the piano as well. And we didn't have a piano at home. And in those days, you couldn't just buy, a cheap keyboard for, a couple of dollars or whatever. You had to have an upright piano or a grand piano, and it was a really expensive instrument to learn. So this lady friend of my mum said, oh, I've been doing a little bit of cleaning for an old lady in the village, and she wants to give her piano to someone. Can you afford £10? Which, how do I put it in today's money? That's probably closer to the value of about $100 today, but that's not an awful lot of money compared to what it would have been to buy a piano outright. So I ended up with this lovely upright piano. And my class teacher at the school, when I was 10, she was a former concert pianist. So she offered to take me on as a student as well. So I started having piano lessons too. And so by the time I moved to Spain, I'd done my bachelor's degree in science of music. So I'd done a kind of combined course with a conservatoire called the Guildhall School of Music in central London and City University in London. And so I'd kind of specialised on the violin, but I'd been through, lots of courses on different world music cultures. So I'd learned about gamelan from Indonesia, and I'd learned about Indian classical music, and I'd learned about West African drumming and things like that. So it was a really innovative course from that perspective.
So it was kind of a music ethnocology. It wasn't necessarily pedagogy. You're learning how to teach people music.
No, not at all.
About music. You're learning about music. We actually have some really good friends who I don't know if they still live there or not, but for maybe 25 years, they had a fairly significant gamelan group in Bali. And we learned a lot about that instrument just because we were friends with those people. And so you were a well-rounded music appreciation, more than just appreciation, but that was your degree. So what's the title of that degree again? That was an interesting title.
So it was a Bachelor of Science of Music.
Okay.
So there was kind of two branches. One was the kind of sociological studies, sociocultural, which is the bit I was really into, and a kind of a bit of music psychology. And the reason I picked that course, not only that I could get my violin lessons at the conservatoire, but also because it had links with the organisation I currently work for today called Nordoff Robbins. And I know we'll probably talk about them later. But so they're a music therapy charity. So I did, an undergraduate course in music therapy. So in the UK, it's a bit different to the US. I think in the US, you can do a bachelor's in music therapy, and then you go on and get your board certification. In the UK, since probably around 2000, when it's been regulated and recognized as a medical profession, you've got to have a master's degree in music therapy. So there's no such thing, you can do an undergraduate course in it, but you can't practice as a therapist until you've done the 2 years master's training, which is what I did much later. So, there I was studying all this stuff, but at the same time, we had some really amazing music studios, and several of the faculty there were pretty acclaimed electroacoustic composers.
Was that was in London?
That was in London, yeah. And some of my friends from there, we're still in touch, 25 years down the line, we're still really close. I have a friend who's just met Stevie Wonder just for there you go. He works for Native Instruments, so he does the kind of music tech software stuff. So
I have a bunch of Native Instrument stuff in our studio. So
yeah. So you know what that's all about.
That's
so my
friend
Tim, yeah. So he was recently out that way. But other friends have gone on to write. I mean, I can't tell you what companies and stuff, but one of my classmates went on to write a bunch of computer soundtracks, made a fortune of doing that. Some of us went into education. One of my close friends is an early music and 21st century music performer. So she was a violist when I was at university with her, but subsequent problems with health and stuff, she developed her singing voice. So she's a soprano, and her husband is quite a famous electroacoustic composer in that sort of niche world. So she performs stuff for soprano and recordings and whatever, but she also does medieval music and plain song and all kinds of early music with recorders and lutes and stuff. Pretty cool stuff, a real mixed bag. Other friends have gone on to be professors of music technology. I mean, all kinds of really cool stuff.
What you talking right now reminds me of something that always hits me. It's not a new idea, but music is so broad. I mean, it can take you so many different places. So, do you have any friends that do music on Twitch? Because that's such a new, very unique. There are people who make their entire living streaming music on Twitch. It's not a huge group, but there are people who do it. And there's this world of Twitch where people actually spend a lot of time on there, and they follow people in gaming, or they do this or do that, and, cooking, music, art, all these kinds of things they can find on Twitch. So there are certain people that are well known in the Twitch world. So there's this whole ecosystem that often is not connected at all to entire realms of music. And some of the stuff you just described to me just reminded me of how broad it is and how they just never touch. Do you have people that, how many of those people derive their primary income from the performance of versus being involved with industries that are musical, but purely performers? Many of them, or?
Not so many. I think my friend Marcia in Germany is probably one of the only ones. I think a lot of us do performing, but it's more of a sideline. It's so hard to be a professional musician in the UK. I mean, without getting extremely political, but the whole kind of change in the law following Brexit and what that meant for being able to tour as a musician anywhere within Europe, which is right on the doorstep here, has just decimated a lot of the music industry. So I think
I had not even considered that ramification of Brexit. I've seen all kinds of reports about how commerce is affected and all the different things that changed with that whole thing. But that aspect I had not even thought about. That's crazy.
It's crazy, and it's had such a negative impact. So musicians who were able to, because people do have a following, is if they're in a sort of niche genre of music, they do have a following across the world nowadays. You've got a global platform, haven't you? But, for practical reasons, the kind of remuneration you could make performing, if you're in a small niche kind of style of music, you're not going to travel to Australia. You're not going to travel to Texas unless you've got a really lucrative concert series or something like that. If you just want to try your luck at a few gigs, you're going to go to the immediate countries that surround you. So, the Netherlands to France to Italy, maybe to Spain, to Germany, wherever your following is going to be. And it's just made it much, much harder these days for anyone to make a living in in that respect. Yeah, I don't know with regards to Twitch. I couldn't name anyone that I know that streams directly on Twitch, but apart from yourselves. But yeah, I'll have to look into it. Maybe some of them.
I can definitely introduce you to some Brits on Twitch. There's some of my favorite ones are. There's some very talented people on Twitch. I'll remind me, and I will send you some links. There's earlier. I don't know if he's still here. One of the people that were in the chat a bit earlier is a gentleman that is regularly on Miriam's stream. He's based in London, and we enjoy his comments and his participation quite a bit. But also he does this Sudoku online, and people chat, and he just talks the whole time he's doing it and explains what he's doing, and he's got a very calming voice and just a very chill, nice. Yeah, he's still here. Hello.
Hi.
So I'll send you some links afterwards so you can learn about some comrades. I guess y'all don't use that term as much as my Russian friends. But the thing is that your background and your community, typically music oriented across a very broad spectrum of things. And that's part of the reason why I like Music Quest, and because the number of people you can talk to, the different topics that you can cover. They might have one similar thread in that it's music, but it can go so many different ways. So I'm thrilled. So you play the violin more than you play the piano.
Probably 50-50 these days. Oh, really? I would say in my current life as a music therapist, I mean, I'm probably on the piano and guitar more than the violin, but I do use my violin quite a lot. Yeah. I don't claim the guitar as a particular skill, but I guess I've picked up a few tricks over the years. And I use my voice a lot, but I would never describe myself predominantly as a singer. I've always sung. So I've sung in school choir since I was a little girl. Yeah, and I've enjoyed choral singing. So yeah, I mean, we haven't really talked about what happened when I got to Spain. So I got to Spain and I just missed a really cool worship camp that had just taken place the week before I arrived. But by the next summer, I was there as violin tutor. So that was really cool because they suddenly realized, oh, you can really play, you can really improvise. That's interesting. And that was all due to my experiences at university, playing in like folk rock groups, just being up for whatever, and really just taught me that it's okay to just have a go when you're improvising. So they were just like, oh, we've never met someone on the violin who doesn't need the music, Of course, I do read music as well, but that was a novel thing because Spanish music pedagogy is quite old-fashioned. It's all about, first of all, you need to have all of the notation and the history and rules of harmony drilled into you before they'll let you touch an instrument. And it becomes really soul destroying because, as you'll probably admit yourself, the fun thing about playing music is actually playing the music, right? It's not, you can get fascinated by this composer or that genre or, how to construct these chords in jazz harmony or whatever. But actually the fun bit is actually doing the music. So yeah, I guess I was kind of coming at it from a slightly different angle than most of the musicians they'd met there. And as a result of that next worship camp the next summer, I got in touch with a band which was rehearsing in Albacete, which is kind of, if Denia's here on the coast, Madrid's right in the middle, Albacete is kind of in a straight line in the middle, about halfway across there. So I recorded a couple of albums with this band called Fortaleza. And that was like a Spanish flamenco pop worship. That sounds really weird, doesn't it? It's a strange mixture.
It sounds awesome. That sounds like a really cool. Nice. Yeah.
there was a proper authentic gitano, which is the kind of someone from the Roma community who was a self-taught percussionist. He was amazing. So he played the cajon, but he could do congas and all kinds of other stuff. We had drums, we had guitar and bass, we had a couple of female vocalists, and one of them was also a keys player. And then I just used to do a bit of strings. So I'd play the violin, but then they're like, oh, you could do some backing vocals with us. Oh, could you just play the piano on this one or that one? So I did a bit of a mixture there. And
I call those floaters. You're a floater. You just kind of cover whatever has to be addressed.
Yeah.
That's good. That gives you some variety.
I'm sure that stood me in good stead for the work I currently do. Definitely. Yeah.
So when's the last time you performed with them?
Oh, so
a long time
I guess,
ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. I'm still kind of in touch on, social media and stuff with some of the band, but people got married. Some people's kids grew up and had families, and, suddenly they weren't available to do stuff. And I left Spain. I mean, that was the major part. But so I left Spain at the end of 2008. And that was pretty much, I went back for a couple of their weddings and that kind of thing, but there was no way I could make it work.
Did you say that band is still intact?
No. I mean, everyone kind of, life happens, so
I'm not surprised that happens pretty regularly, but I also couldn't tell exactly if you had said that there was still like another version of another iteration still going on. So flamenco.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? I know what I think about it.
Okay.
I like it a lot, but just inform our people who may or may not know about it. What your personal experience was engaging a culture where that was part of it, and then also being in a band where that was a style that influenced what was going. Just tell me about your thoughts on that. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. So, I mean, flamenco really comes from the southern part of Spain. So from Andalusia, which is a big province right at the southern tip of Spain. And it's influenced by so many genres. So, I mean, I didn't grow up. It wasn't a style that I heard at home. It wasn't the kind of music that my mum was into. But obviously, a lot of Spanish pop music has had that influence in it because it's just part of the culture of the overall country, but it's definitely a style originating and predominating in southern Spain. So when I was at university, I did a course in improvisation and cognition, and I remember hearing something in a lecture along the lines of, oh, well, how music has traveled from the ancient cultures in India and Persia, and the sitar traveled along the Silk Road, and then it came to Spain, it became the guitar. So then we became, that's where the flamenco roots came from. So I remember doing some kind of study, because I'd done a lot of studies in Indian, North Indian classical music, and also in Middle Eastern music. So Persian, kind of Iranian, Afghan, Sufi, a little bit of that. So like I had a little bit of information about these different cultures and their rhythmic patterns and the kind of chords they use, or the kind of scale systems. So I was really fascinated to kind of put that against flamenco and go, oh yeah, you can see that, oh yeah, we have a few features here that sound kind of familiar. But when I went to Spain, the first year I lived out there was at the end of 98. So 99, I went to the April Fair, the Feria de Abril, which is a big flamenco festival in Seville, which takes place every 4 years. And I was so excited. I'm like, oh, finally, I'm going to see some proper flamenco. And I was so disappointed that when I got down there, it was all canned music. There was nothing live, because the live music was hidden away in little tavernas, and you had to know the people on the inside, to go along and really see it. So I have seen some since then. When I was living in Spain, I saw a few performances, and on subsequent trips back. And over here as well, I've seen a few things in the UK, dance and guitars and cajon players or whatever performing live. So personally, I'm fascinated by the kind of the passion, by there's this this word duende, which it's really hard to translate, but it's kind of like the essence, the spirit, the real absolute, almost like the ecstasy that these flamenco singers and performers, the guitarists and the dancers reach, when the performance really reaches a peak. So, that's the kind of terminology that people use with a really great flamenco performance. But in my experience, it's a pretty closed world. I mean, I think just because of the persecution that those Roma peoples have experienced in Spain, sadly, there's still quite a lot of racism. There's quite a lot of suspicion. There's a lot of generalizations about, oh, yeah, those gypsies, they're thieves, or they're dishonest, or they're uneducated and stuff like that. And of course, like any prejudice, any stereotype, that there might be a grain of truth in some of it, but for the majority of the people, that's not a fair assessment of their culture. So yeah,
the thing you said right there, I always say stereotypes are useful. I don't put a negative spin on stereotypes as a lot of people do, because stereotypes got there for a reason. Now, they're perpetuated and they're exaggerated often in very, very unfair ways. But generally, stereotypes came out of something that was right, and I don't see them as negative. In the case you're talking about, it really is often very damaging. But there's also a world of stories that go along with those stereotypes, and the problem is, like our news and our social media and all that kind of stuff, is the bad stories are the ones that keep getting told over and over and over. They sell papers, they get clicks, and so unfortunately, all the good parts of cultures often do not get the press. Therefore, you don't hear about them as much. So it's a skewed world, no matter how you look at it. But so that particular style of music, I didn't realize. I wasn't expecting to hear what you said as far as it being as closed and hard to actually get a personal firsthand glimpse at it. I think so often there's a commercialized version of it that, is good for tourism. But my suspicions are what you were describing was not that, and more along the lines of the authentic roots that really doesn't necessarily put itself out there as quickly.
And I think, I think it's right that they should be proud and they should be, selective about who they let enter their worlds. It's something precious. Well, I mean, I'm just recalling another of my professors at university, one of the ethnomusicology professors, we used to talk about, cultural assimilation and, with particularly with the internet taking off in the late 20th century, which was when I was at university, and how, therefore, if you can now tune in and hear music from the other side of the world, are we all going to end up just singing pop songs and British or American pop songs? So I remember first going out to Spain in '98, and I was like 21 years old. I was going out with my roommate, who was a British girl. We were both there on like European Union scholarships for a year to go and do different things, to work in schools as assistants and stuff. So we were young women, and we were like, let's go and sample the culture. So we used to go out to the bars at the weekend and disco. Bar is like, they serve soft drinks and alcoholic drinks, but there's a big dance floor as well. So it was kind of the place to hang out with young people and dance and so on. And I just remember being so shocked that, I thought I knew quite a lot of music, quite a lot of pop music anyway, in my surroundings, and particularly having been a student of music and so on. But I did not know any of the singers. I didn't know any of the big hits or the big artists, because I'd never seen them. I'd never heard. And I didn't realize what a huge pop music industry there was in Spain that was so exciting and so and so influenced by stuff like flamenco. And I'd just never been exposed to it. But it wasn't only Spanish music. There was Italian music. There was Dutch music. There was German stuff. And I'm like, this has all been, I've been so isolated living on an island that is famous for its own music industry and recording artists, and has somehow kind of closed its ears in the kind of commercial sense to all of these other influences. The only Spanish singer who was known was probably like Julio Iglesias and then his son Enrique Iglesias, and you get the very occasional South American pop star like, Ricky Martin or Shakira or someone like that, who were absolutely massive in Spain, but you only heard the songs that came out in English because they just didn't think an English audience would buy into, I don't know, a foreign language song, which is so crazy. And I remember feeling so angry that I'd been completely culturally brainwashed from living on an island where all I got to hear was the stuff that was in English, which was predominantly American and British,
I mean, you have to, I get your point, but a lot of people feel uncomfortable when they don't understand what's happening. There is a certain mindset that I think happens over time the more you're exposed to it. The number of times I'm sitting on a plane in some foreign country and I have absolutely no idea what they're saying over the PA, and they're talking about my safety. It doesn't hit me the same way it used to, because I think I've gotten used to it's all going to be okay. The world has become much more English friendly. Just about no matter where you go. There used to be, I'd say 20 years ago, there used to be airports you could go to where there was nothing in English. And I'd say about 10 years ago for sure, almost all of the airports have their language and some English for you. And so very, very blessed that way. But yeah, I get where you're going, but I think it's not hard to believe that people want to hear music they can understand. Yeah. But I mean, like I said, once you get to a point and you realize the beauty of the music and you have any inclination as to, wow, this is amazing. The only reason why I was not introduced to this is because the language is not mine. There's a couple of, we went to Vladivostok in 2012, and we were at a church there, and they had produced 2 praise and worship albums. I'm sure they had done more, but they gave us copies of these 2 praise and worship albums. They're in Russian. I cannot understand them. Even I studied Russian a little bit, and there was a point in time where I started hearing and understanding certain words better. That has not continued, for the record, but the language itself is very familiar to me. But when I listen to those albums, I have no idea what they're saying. But I love those albums, and I did do some research as to what they were about. I can't remember most of them. So we had to cut some people slack that they want to hear music in their own language. But but here we are. Anna and I are here to anybody who's listening to this who doesn't already do this. We encourage you to enjoy music that is not in your language. Yeah.
And I think, I would say again, I keep coming back to my undergraduate degree. That was such a kind of energizing point, really, just to be challenged. I remember having to sit there through some Western classical art, art music that was just not very pleasant, and thinking, and complaining about it. And, the professor saying, well, you're so used to canned music, which lasts exactly 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes max, that you can't tolerate sitting through something that lasts 10 minutes long. Get used to it, and it was such a challenge. So I guess I went into that first year living in Spain, already with a more ethnographic approach to that. And obviously I could speak Spanish, so I kind of just felt like it'd been hidden away. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just in the places that I was not, but it wasn't on my radio. It wasn't on the soundtrack to any movies I was watching.
You're being kind. It was hidden away. There was no opportunity. You had to move to Spain to get that music. That's all there is to it. That's just you're being polite.
So coming back to the band, to Fortaleza, so by the time I got into that band, I'd been exposed to a lot of Spanish pop music by that point. So I was kind of more comfortable with those rhythms, with those grooves, with that kind of stuff. So obviously I played in the worship band, and I really liked that. I'd become a Christian when I was a university student, when I was in London. So I hadn't kind of grown up with any particular church music tradition, but I had gone to a public school, which was we have schools that are kind of sponsored by churches. So mine was kind of sponsored by the Anglican Church, the Church of England, in the town where I grew up. And so we, in exchange for that sort of funding and that input, that sort of pastoral kind of input, we used to go and sing for particular church services like once a term. So I had learned a lot of sacred music through that, choral music and so on, which I enjoyed singing. But I didn't have a particular music identity. In fact, part of the story about how I became a Christian is really tied up with the music, because here I was in London, learning about all these fascinating kinds of music from other cultures. And I was chatting with a couple of friends off my course in the Barbican. The Barbican is like a big concert hall and sort of conference complex. There's like theatres and cinemas, and there's a cafe there. There's a foyer. And on Sunday lunchtimes, they used to have free kind of local jazz musicians. The music college was right alongside. So the students would come, or local professionals who were going to donate their time for half an hour or so on a Sunday. So my friends and I used to go and sit there and have like a coffee or something and sit and, chew the fat, as it were. So I was there with my friend Marcia, the one who lives in Germany, and my friend Sarah Jane, who is also on our course. And we'd just been learning about Tristan and Isolde, which is one of Wagner's operas. So it's based on a King Arthur legend. And we were talking about this, and I was talking about how I'd been really challenged by learning about this opera and the storyline. And it's all about kind of the two protagonists end up doing this kind of suicide pact, and through their death, that there's some kind of reconciliation with their love and so on. So we were having a chat about this, and my friend Marcia was a Christian. She said, "Oh, that's like the love that God has for us, that it took the death of his son Jesus to reconcile us." And I was like, gosh, I'd never thought of it like that. I didn't know loads about Jesus or anything, but I was kind of fascinated. So she invited me along to church, and I went with her. And so through that process, I became a Christian. And then I thought, oh well, I want to find a church to go to, but music was a big problem. And I just remember the church I ended up going to and getting baptized in was a Baptist church just up the road. And I went with a dear friend of mine who we'd been friends since we were like 6 years old, and she was a Christian. And I'd moved away to a different part of the UK, but we'd been kind of pen pals, and we'd both chosen to go to the same university. So we kind of, rekindled our friendship more at university. And yeah, she's still one of my dearest friends today. So the two of us went off looking for a church, and I said to her, well, you know what? I'm not going anywhere where they have like those bad 80s pop songs in the music, because that's just not real music. So it was a real bugbear for me. And I would say it's something.
So are you saying that particular time, that was the predominant music showing up in the services? It was not classical-ish at all. It was very like bad 80s pop. Is that what you would call it?
I didn't really know, but I'd seen or I'd heard a few kind of praise and worship songs that were really cheesy. And I was just like, does that translate well? Cheesy, just...
Yeah, cheesy does translate.
Yeah, okay. So they weren't very cool. They weren't musically interesting. They had maybe 3 chords and like a soft, strings pad at the background. Right. And really lame kind of vocals. They weren't even that great in scriptural content. So that was the kind of thing I was objecting to. And obviously, I hadn't heard much Christian music by that point. But yeah, I've definitely mellowed in that opinion over the years. And since part of my role nowadays is that I get to lead the worship in the church that I do currently.
All right.
I have a lot more say in. Yeah.
This is an important question for you. Take your time. This is going to be easy. So, has your understanding broadened, or has your standards gone down? Answer carefully.
Maybe I should just take a moment here before I answer this question. I would say a mixture of both things. So,
all right,
the worship,
honest right here. That's good stuff.
So the worship songs I tend to really that stick in my head are the ones that have more than 3 chords in them, a little bit more interesting. But I've also learned, since I've been leading congregational singing, for quite a few years now, that actually there is quite a lot of merit in a simple chorus, something that people can get on board with and sing. Because if the song's too complicated, then people can't engage with it. They just can't enjoy singing it because they can't remember how the tune goes, or they lose track of the timing. So yeah, I would say I've conceded that some of those so-called bad 80s pop songs are actually quite good for the congregation, but I'm always seeking stuff that just is a bit more musically interesting, whether that's in the lyrics, whether that's with a more interesting harmony or a bit more rhythmic.
All right, so even though I'm not in charge of such things, okay? Let's just make sure everybody understands I'm not in charge, but you gave the right answer. Well, I'm not in charge, but I had this conversation with a guy recently, and I fully appreciated his comments about songs that are repetitive and painfully unimaginative, and I get it from a musical standpoint. Things that are interesting, but part of what makes it interesting is your understanding of music at probably a different level than a lot of your general. You just go out and grab 1,000 people from the community. Not everybody's going to care. And as much as the function of those songs is for people to engage, it's a very delicate balance. And the real beautiful ones do have legitimate content, scripturally sound concepts that are not incredibly complicated and yet not cookie cutter. And so there's something musically interesting about them, and yet they're accessible to people who don't understand why it's different musically, and then it's a good song. So those are the ones that really stand out, in my opinion. But yeah, I appreciate the fact that you described the accessibility aspect, because I it's really easy. And you know what? It's interesting on this particular topic. It kind of depends on what mood I'm in that day as to where I land on this one. So it sounds like you evolved a little bit.
I would like to say I matured a bit. Yeah.
Okay. So I do want to completely derail your current chronological story that you're doing. So keep doing that. But at some point, I really do want to go back and talk specifically about the classical influences and your interests as well. So keep going. You're in London. Your friends, you found some music that you now appreciate more than you originally did. Is that a recap a little bit?
That's a recap. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I went out to Spain, and one of the things I loved in our church was that people did not just take whatever the current, Hillsong's hit was, or the current Matt Redman, or whatever the kind of the celebrity, let's say the celebrity worship league, the songs that were all the Christian bestsellers that I'd seen in the UK, they didn't just take those and translate them into Spanish. So there was an element of that to some degree, but there were so many kind of in-house composers across I was in a Baptist church in Spain, and it was such a kind of small community that there was a real fight to actually, let's make this our own music, let's write our own songs in our own words, that we're not just translating someone else's concept, but these really speak to us as Spaniards. So I really, really enjoyed that. And I think because naturally they were influenced by all of those elements of Spanish music that includes some of those kind of flamenco rhythms or chord progressions and stuff, that made it interesting and new for me as well. So I really enjoyed that. So I also sang in a gospel choir while I was in Spain. We had a pretty big gospel choir. There was about maybe 200 of us. And again, that was a style that just appealed to so many people. So we used to go and sing out in kind of open air performances or in big church meetings or whatever. And it was just an opportunity to kind of invite people who weren't naturally part of that community to come on and to listen, because it just had such a mass appeal. So at some point down the line, I ended up coming back to the UK. And one of the things I'd missed out, just talking about the classical music, in Denia, I had a really good pianist friend from Cuba who was a classically trained concert pianist. So she and I used to perform quite regularly. We would put on like recitals. And I did a little bit of maybe string quartet work when I could find other string players. But the part of Spain where I was living, there weren't really a predominance of string players. So I guess that's why I stood out for people, because they hadn't heard many classically trained violinists. It wasn't like a really common thing in that town and that part of Spain. But I really missed playing in orchestras. So when I came back to the UK, the start of 2009, I came back in a teaching role, and I came back as the head of music in a middle school. So we don't tend to have middle school very much in the UK, but this was an area that still had that kind of age bracket. So the age bracket I'm talking is like 9 to 13 years old. So in this country, our primary school is up until 11 and secondary is 11 to 18. So middle school was like that middle 4-year chunk, so the end of primary and the beginning of secondary. So through my work there, I just got back in touch. I moved back to an area where I'd grown up and had lots of friends from youth orchestras that I'd played in and so on. And I got involved in a kind of semi-professional orchestra called St. Aldham's, because it meets in a church called St. Aldham's. Not because it's like a religious orchestra, it's just an good amateur orchestra. So so I lead that orchestra nowadays. And
well, hold it. You said you lead it?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So you say that the name of it is tied to the venue.
It's tied to the venue because we rehearse in a big church, because there's like 70 to 100 of us. So I got the opportunity to play The Lark Ascending by Vaughan Williams with them a few years back. That was a lovely opportunity to kind of really work at something and be the soloist and enjoy that. But I love orchestral music. I really enjoy playing, with a big group of musicians. I love doing that as a kind of, from the age of 11, I joined a youth orchestra locally, and just loved playing some huge orchestral works.
Last week, I think it was last week, maybe a week, within the last couple of weeks, whenever it was, Miriam and I were blessed to have a meal with some neighbors. And when I say neighbors, they're like a 20-minute drive away. They both play the cello. And they are involved in different orchestras. And you've been to Waco. We went to the zoo together, or we did something in Waco together.
We met up for a meal, didn't we? Yeah, we had an amusing time with my niece.
Okay, but in Waco, one of them has been a member there for like 35 years in their orchestra, And so we were over there, had a good time visit. We didn't go over there specifically to do music, but we just enjoyed company and had a meal. But then Miriam talked them into letting her accompany them, and they played. And and I am such a sucker for a violin. I mean, a cello. Violin is one of those instruments that I have attitudes about, because I love violin. Okay, but I have found that I only love violin when it's played well. Anything other than that, I'm not so much in love with it. But cello, and I'm saying cello is probably the same way, because I wouldn't know, because these two are both excellent. But the reason why I'm even bringing this up is that on the way home, I told Miriam, I'm like, we need to go to some performances, because there is nothing like the sounds, the reverberations of a live orchestra. It is. Yeah. I every time I'm around one or have heard one, I just keep reminding myself, oh yeah, this you can't do this sound through speakers. It's got to be live. So I'm thrilled that you do that.
Yeah, I would say the step beyond that. I mean, to be an audience member with a live symphony orchestra, 100 musicians on stage is incredible. But to be in the midst of it, and when you play the violin, you tend to be, right in the middle there. So you're getting the benefit of all of the sound that's kind of emanating around you. It's just incredible. It's something that I really love to do. And I've been playing with St Aldham's since 2009, since I came back, and I've been leading it.
Are there any performances of that online?
I don't think we have anything online, but we do have a website that has a little bit of history about us. So I'll see if I can send you a message with the details for that.
All right. It is not. I've done multiple Music Quest streams where we've not listened to any music. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But, I just, I thought that might have been something we could listen to that would be good. But, so keep going. I keep interrupting you, but that's what I do. Apologies.
So I was going to say I can send you a link for that, but I think I'll do that after the event, and then you can include it.
We'll add it.
Yeah, but I don't think we have any public recordings of that. But so nowadays my kind of musical life outside of my job, which would be a good thing to talk about in a minute, is based around the kind of church music. So we have a kind of contemporary band in our church, but we're a pretty small church. So we have myself on piano and vocals, a couple of other vocalists, a bass player, a drummer, and a trombonist. So it's kind of a really interesting mixture. So I don't get to play violin quite as much these days in my church, but I do sometimes on like special occasions. I'll do like a violin solo or something. So there's that. And then there's the orchestra that I lead, St Aldham's. And then I play chamber music with some different people. But so there's a kind of string orchestra that's a kind of professional one that I play with from time to time. So I've got a concert coming up in the middle of June, which is going to be some Vaughan Williams music, and then a CPE Bach cello concerto. So the conductor's father is a fantastic cello soloist. He'll be performing the solo, and so I tend to play. I've generally played principal second violin for that orchestra, so that's really good as well, because I love being around musicians who are better than me, that really stretch me, and make me kind of work a bit harder, do the practice, and kind of just hone my technique still. And then I play in a piano quintet. Well, it's kind of occasionally a string quartet and sometimes a piano quintet with some lovely ladies. They're all ladies who are kind of sort of in my parents' age group and even older. And so they're just lovely to spend time with. They're so musically experienced in a range of chamber and kind of orchestral and singing and whatever. But we've done some pretty lovely piano quintet. So we discovered, there's a really famous violin concerto by Max Bruch, a German composer, and this was a piano quintet by the same composer, which was really unheard of. And we really got our teeth stuck into this and did a few rehearsals and then did some summer recitals. Lots of the big churches locally tend to put on a series of concerts over the summertime. So they'll put things on which are free to attend, and you kind of give a donation at the end. And they tend to be like an hour's recital. So we played that one. We've done a mix of some Gershwin arrangements, really nice in a kind of piano and string quartet arrangement. The pianist is sadly not very well at the moment, so we're working on a string quartet. So we're working on a Dvorak string quartet. There's a famous one called the American Quartet, and the one we're rehearsing is the one he wrote after that, which, if you know anything about music, you'll know C major is a pretty good key on the piano, at least, because it's all the white notes on the piano. So we were looking at a range of quartets by Dvorak, a Czech composer, and I was like, oh, C major sounds good. It's really hard. I'm playing first violin. It's incredibly hard. So in the next couple of days, I need to do some work on that before it's ready for any kind of performance. But yeah.
So in a month, on average, how often are you playing where there is an audience listening?
Some months I've had a concert every weekend with a paid audience. Other months I'll go with, just playing music for fun, just rehearsing. I mean, church every week, there's a congregation there, but I don't kind of consider that the same, really.
That's not really what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I would say there's kind of an intensive period of learning stuff. And then with this piano quintet, for example, we do like 3-4 performances over the summer months, but we'll spend all winter working up a program of like an hour or so. With the other orchestras, it's like as and when. So the orchestra I lead, St Aldham's, we have 3 concerts a year. So at the end of every kind of term, we'll put on a show. And then I kind of quite often get roped into doing other concerts. So this month, we're still in May, aren't we? So at the beginning of this month, on the coronation day, I was involved in a kind of from scratch orchestra, which played a very eclectic program of a Mozart symphony and then some short works for orchestra. There were about 80 of us playing, I think, and it was a fundraising concert for Noordhof Robbins, Noordhof and Robbins, as we're called now, the music therapy charity I work for. So yeah, that was just a couple of weeks back. And I knew some of the musicians there, lots of them I'd never met before. Some had traveled from all over the country to come together and join in. And we basically had 2 evening run-throughs and a bit of the afternoon of the day, and then put on the show. So that was, nothing like that to keep you on your toes.
That is outstanding. It is not surprising, but it's still something you can't take for granted that everybody is going to be getting to use their talents and engage on such a regular basis. So you've mentioned it multiple times. Yeah. I would like to recommend that now is the appropriate time to tell us more about the company you work with and what you do. I would love to do that if you don't mind. So
yeah, I'd love to.
Tell us.
So, Noordhof and Robbins, we've just been rebranded with the "and" put in the middle. So we're talking about 2 people in the late 1950s. Paul Noordhof, an American composer and pianist, and Clive Robbins was a UK special education teacher. And they met at a Steiner school. So they were both really interested in that kind of Steiner educational approach. And they were in a special school in the Cotswolds, I think, sort of just a little north of where I live here, a couple of hours drive north, and began to notice that these children with what we'd probably call like a mild learning disability nowadays, moderate learning disability, so maybe they had Down syndrome or they had a kind of form of autism, but mostly they were verbal. So they found that these children responded incredibly to music. And it wasn't just playing music at them, but it was actually putting a drum in their hands and a stick, or giving them a go on the piano, or giving them some chimes or something that had different pitches on it, some kind of tune percussion. And by kind of tuning into their movements, by tuning into their vocal sounds, by tuning into their rhythmic pulse, that they were able to really see these children become much more regulated. If we're talking about the ones with autism, for example, kind of just notice them and actually make music with them. So it was a really collaborative approach. So I understand that, different schools of music therapy were kind of coming into play at the time, but Nordoff and Robbins were some of the pioneers, both here in the UK and in the States. And so there's still Nordoff Robbins work in the US, in Canada, in Australia, in Japan, I think in Singapore. And we have several centres here within the UK. And I think in Europe, there's quite a few places. So there's different schools of music therapy. Some people see it more as a passive thing. But what really appealed to me about Nordoff Robbins, as I was probably about 15 years old when I first heard of music therapy, and I did a little research project at school on it. And I thought, this is so fascinating, because actually making music with people is something that is really therapeutic. And I knew that for myself. I knew that as a musician, that making music was something that helped me maybe calm down, or help me kind of get a little bit more animated and a bit more lively if I was feeling sluggish. And it just brought me so much joy to be with other people with like-minded and make music together. So probably around that age when I kind of felt that music therapy was the thing I would like to get into. And I kind of geared my study. So this bachelor's degree that I did, I went there because it was linked to Nordoff Robbins, and I knew I could do an undergraduate course there. And I was like 20, talking to the professor, and I was like, this is like my dream job. Oh, this is what I really want to do. And he basically told me, to kind of curb my enthusiasm a little bit and to grow up. Well, he didn't say it kind of so bluntly, but he...
Really?
Yeah, that's kind of what he said. He said, there is a sort of minimum age for studying music therapy in the UK. At that time, at least, it was like minimum 25 years old, something like that.
So
and he said,
you know who this person is?
Yeah.
And you know how to get hold of them? And you are going to send them a link to their website that has your picture all over it, right?
I mean, he still works for us, so yeah, I'm sure he's... But,
so the guy that told you to curb your enthusiasm still works? Oh,
yeah, he's still like...
I thought this was the person... okay.
No. So I trained...
Great.
I did my undergraduate course with this same charity that I work for nowadays. So it's an NGO. It's gone through different iterations and name and logo changes. But one of the things that Nordoff Robbins had from the start was a big link with the music industry. So they did like one of those Wembley Stadium concerts to raise money for setting up a music therapy centre. So they set up an awards event called the Silver Clefs, which is still going on today. And if you look on our website, you'll see anyone who's anyone in the music industry has won a Silver Clef, has won an award for something or other. So one of the people that will be really familiar in the States is Nile Rodgers. So he's really come on board with our charity and does a lot of promotion and fundraising for us. So like we have there's a sequence of charity events that take place over the year, but there's a traditional carol concert every year in central London with the 9 lessons and carols, but it also features various pop stars. So like last Christmas, it was Nile Rodgers and Chic, and it was Rod Stewart, and I mean, Paul McCartney, name anyone massive in music, and they've been awarded something for Nordoff Robbins. And of course, that's a kind of two-way street, because you get a huge celebrity musician to endorse your music therapy work, and you and then you get access to their funding. You know, they want to give funds to charitable work, and they say, oh yeah, we're gonna pick your charity. So thanks to that.
That was funny, because you keep that's kind of a two-way street. No, that's a big two-way street. I love how you keep like soft selling these statements. It's very
that
British.
Is a very British, yeah.
Yes, it is. No, that's awesome. I was sitting there distracted by looking through all this stuff. I didn't see that part of the website when I was looking at it earlier. So one of the things that let me see if I can pull this up. There we go. So the website has all kinds of stuff on it, and the thing I was referring to earlier is when you go to About Us and We Are Music. I think you're on here a lot. I'm trying to figure out, where was it? There's a bunch of pictures of Anna on here. If you just scroll around, people. Is it in one of the stories?
Oh,
well, there's a bunch of them.
Okay. Oh, you might have seen more than me.
Yeah, you're out there more than once. I think that guitar. Well, let's see. It doesn't matter. Keep talking. I apologize. I'll keep scrolling around while you're talking.
Okay, so Noordhof Robbins. So I did this undergraduate course. There's one of me. Oh, hey. I have seen that photo. But we had like a professional photo shoot come down to one of my workplaces about 2 months ago. So they're just, using some of those, which is great to see. But so here was me having like my wings clipped at the age of 20, thinking, oh, but this is my dream job. Oh, this is a lovely story. This guy here, I've seen him today actually in my work. He's a lovely, lovely, sweet guy who loves music. And you can read his story on the website. I'm not going to tell you that. It's a spoiler. You can read it on there. But he's a really sweet guy. So I was 20 and I had my wings clipped. And I was like, so what am I going to do for a few years? This guy was saying, I would come back to this, when you're about 30, get loads of people experience, see the world, go and work with lots of different kinds of people. And I literally thought, okay. So I was coming up to the end of my degree. And I thought, it might be fun to go and live in Spain. So I looked into this scholarship with the European Union and I got selected. So I was kind of one of 8 people that got sent to Spain out of a pool of, several hundred applicants. So, I was really blessed to end up where I did. And because I put on there, I would love to go to a school where you have some special education departments. I got sent down to Gandia, which is just north of Denia. So I'd never been to Valencia. I hadn't been to that part of Spain before. And that was my link with then, through church connections and stuff, I ended up working in Denia a few years later. So, I did my music teaching there and I did my teacher training qualification while I was living in Spain. And, through my work with the praise and worship band, with the kind of Spanish flamenco pop, Christian band, we used to do all kinds of social campaigns. So we went into a prison, we went to like drug rehabilitation centers, all kinds of street work, evangelistic campaigns and stuff. So basically, I just ended up with a load of experience of working with people who were marginalized or people who, didn't have access to music in the same way to live music. So that was great. And then I'm just going to add a little aside here, which is the other side of my family. So my grandmother on my father's side was South African, and I'd always wanted to go to South Africa. And so I kind of hit 30 and I thought, well, this would be a good thing to do. So I found a short-term missions trip and I ended up going to Johannesburg for about a month to work in a children's home for HIV affected babies and young children. And that made such a huge impact on me that I went back the next year for 2 months, which was the whole of my summer vacation at the school. And that was really transformational because it just opened my eyes to a lot of the issues that children growing up in the kind of care settings struggle with. So so that was another string to my bow, if you like, with the people work. And I also did some care work in the summer holidays, like for older people. So, I was just building up this profile of work with people. So I came back to the UK and I was head of music in this middle school for about 7 years. But at the same time, there was always this longing to get into music therapy. And finally, a friend of mine kind of from university basically said, "Why aren't you doing that yet?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." So at the age of 38, I went back to university. I did a 2 years master's degree. I did a really crazy commute. I commuted like 1,000 miles each week to go to study in Manchester, which is in northwestern UK, and did my training with Northrop Robbins there. So yeah,
so is that so that commute was because of where you wanted to do the training? That was the main thing. So there were other programs, but they weren't the programs you wanted.
Sure.
Okay.
So I mean, so Northrop Robbins has its headquarters in London. They have a base in Manchester. They have a base in Newcastle up in northeast England, and then they have a couple of bases in Scotland, and then there's work in Wales, but there's not a training program there. So I applied to London, which I could have traveled to much more comfortably from where I live. But they just took one cohort for London 1 year, and then the following year it was Manchester at the time. So I was like, I really want to do this. And it was a really good time for me to be getting out of teaching. Stuff was changing in the landscape in the school where I was at, and music was being a little bit sidelined. And, I wasn't very happy. And so I just thought, you know what, this is only going to put me out for a couple of years. I'm just going to do it. And, through a friend from church, put me in touch with a mutual friend in Manchester who said, "Yeah, come and stay at my house every week when you come up." So I just went up for 2 nights. I used to do like substitute teaching on the days when I wasn't training, like on a placement or at college. So just somehow it all came together for those 2 years. It was crazy for 2 years, but at the end of it, I came out with my master's degree, with my registration with the Health and Care Professions Council, who is our like our board certified, that's our regulatory body in this country. And I came out with a full-time job for Northrop Robbins in the area where I live, which is amazing. So we're now like 6.5 years down the line.
So can I stop and just make a point?
Yeah.
Almost every good story worth listening to, and people who have lives that seem to matter, an important aspect of that is them doing something kind of crazy at some point. I mean, you everything you've said is your willingness to step out and do something you've not done before, and your willingness to do something as crazy as what you just described. And not all crazy ideas are good ideas. Okay, let's make sure everybody is good on that one. Just because it's crazy doesn't mean good, but the good stories almost always have some sort of crazy element to it, because you gotta go do it. So I just, that's probably obvious, but I think there's too many people who are like, "Wow, you guys do some really interesting things," and I'm like, yeah. We've taken some really interesting chances, and we've done some things we had no idea how we were going to do it. And one thing leads to another, and then you end up doing something you love. So,
yeah, no, it's incredible. And it's been an amazing experience, really kind of fulfilling that ambition in terms of my work goal 25 years after I first thought about it. It's just incredible. So I'll just hook it all back in with my experiences leading up to that point. So all those years I was in education and playing with the bands and living in Spain and all of that, and even the travels to South Africa is kind of tied in with the work that I've ended up doing. So my working week is right now I'm 3 days in schools. Every day I go to a different workplace, but 4 of them are really close to where I live. One of them is like a 38 miles or something. So it's not unbearable. I did end up commuting to the Isle of Wight, which is the little island just in the English Channel. I can see it from where I live, but to get there, it was like a 3-hour journey each way. So that was quite hardcore. I ended up doing that for a couple of years. But do you know what? It was just so joyful to do the work I was doing that I kind of got used to it and just got on with it. But so I'm in 3 schools. I'm in a day centre for adults with learning disabilities and physical disabilities and mental health problems, and older adults who've had a stroke or with dementia. So just basically adults who need a lot of support needs. Some who are non-verbal, some of them are verbal. It's really a wonderful place. And I also work with refugees and asylum seekers 1 day a week. So my work in schools has been primarily focused around those experiences I had in South Africa. So I'm working a lot with children in the care system. So whether in foster care or who have been adopted and have had some problems settling in with their families. So there's a lot of overlapping threads there, I would say, with the refugee work as well. I work a lot with young asylum seekers, so children, teenagers, young people who've made it here. The kind of famous stories in this country, we don't have people trying to get in from Mexico. We have people coming and landing literally on the beach, just down the road from where I live, or coming in on these, tiny dinghies, inflatable boats, and often with quite catastrophic, horrible stories. Many of them don't make it over and so on. But do you know what? It's wonderful. And I just think music has so much to offer people who are isolated for any kind of reason. So whether that's a mental health problem, whether that is such a traumatic experience that they have kind of blocked out connecting with other people, whether that is because of, autism and not finding social situations comfortable, whether that is somebody who has never developed speech. So basically, if you have complex disabilities and needs, you don't have any way to communicate verbally. You might not be able to move your body very much, so you can't communicate with gesture. You might not be able to read and write, so you can't communicate in any kind of pictorial or with writing. But so, you have sounds you can make,
I'm going to do what I often do. I'm going to tread on a very sketchy, thin line, but everybody's going to give me a little grace on this. I'm not trying to correlate my story to these people, okay? Mm-hmm. However, we work, I feel silly, we work with a world-class cattle dog trainer, mm-hmm. who is a dog whisperer. And the reason why when you're describing the people you work with, I'm envisioning you using all of your skill and all of your experience, is that as you engage these people, you've got all of this sensory information that you're noticing how they hold their body, what they respond to. There are all these really subtle things that you're very much in tune with, paying attention to. Mm-hmm. And to the outside person, they can't see what's going on, but there's a lot going on. And my cattle dog trainer, when he works with dogs, obviously they can't speak. He has this ability to very, very quickly figure out what's going on and what is going to work and where the interaction's going to be. I think everybody can see why I'm saying I'm on thin ice here. But at the same time, I hope you can see why I thought this, because to see him work with someone, you're like, how does he know this? And it's all of these years of experience. He has a gift, and to be able to assess what is the next step in whatever they're trying to do. So with that in mind, I am super interested and I know I know this, it depends on the person. I get that. But overall, I would love to hear you talk about the things that you've learned over time that are interesting to you as far as engaging marginalized people, the people that don't have the ability to use English or any language to talk to. Are there patterns? Are there things like, do you just show up in a room and with different instruments and see what they respond to? I'd really love to hear some things that you can share, even if they're specific and not generally true. Can you share any of that? I know this is a big ask, but how does that work? I mean, how do you engage in what is it normally? How long does it take and that kind of thing?
The thing is, I think you probably know the answer to this.
I do.
I think you do, because all of us use music. You know, all of us have a connection and a story to do with music. You know, whether we consider ourselves a professional musician, an amateur musician, a music lover, an appreciator of music, or it's just something that's always in the background when we're watching a movie or playing a computer game or driving and listening to the radio or whatever. We all have a story and a connection with music. So we notice the things that, you know, is it a particular kind of beat that gets, you know, just kind of quickens us, gets our heart racing that bit faster, just puts a bit of spring in our step? Is it a particular groove or a style of music that just makes us start tapping our toes or want to move around? Is it, here's a lovely example, really recent one from yesterday. I was with a group of older adults at this day centre, and there's a lady there who has a mild learning disability and has some paralysis on one side of her body. And we were singing, she asked us to sing Scarborough Fair. And she started laughing at the end of singing. This was a group of about 12 people there and myself. And we all had some instruments and we were all singing along, and everyone there was verbal in that particular group. And she just laughed. She says, "Oh, that's just the thing to cheer up my joints." And she was really smart. She says, "Oh, sorry, everyone, but I feel so happy." And I said to her, "But this song's pretty sad, actually. This song is kind of a sad song." And she was just giggling. And, you know, sometimes, conversely, we need that sad music, don't we, to cheer ourselves up, you know, to somehow we connect that there's that cathartic aspect of something that's really sad that just takes us out of our own situation. And this was a really vivid case in point for me. I was just thinking, wow, isn't that funny that such a sad song was just making her feel so happy, so relaxed.
There's that when music hits you right, happy is one of the words you use, but there's something that happens. I know that when I am in a less than fantastic mood, I can put on one particular artist, anything. And there's something, I always am just in a little bit or a lot better mood just a couple of minutes in because of how it connects. You know, what you're saying, it's interesting. It sounds so familiar. I was literally on a call 3 hours before we did ours. Or maybe it was only 2. No, it was 3 hours before we did ours. And the call didn't end up going like we wanted, so I ended up just talking with this person. The third person didn't show up, and we were just talking through some stuff. I forget how we got there, but in the course of that conversation, he made the statement, because we were talking about cross-cultural issues, and he said there are 3 things, there's more than that probably, but there are 3 things he identified that are universal that cross all of me. One of them was body language in general. That wouldn't have been on my list, but yeah, obviously. One of them that he was bringing up was math. But the first one he brought up that was a no-brainer was music. And we were just talking about what you just said. And it had nothing to do with Music Quest. It was something else, but it is so universal. So do you hit them with some music? Do you play? I mean, do you just play audio and see what they respond to? Or, I mean, when you're first meeting someone?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I want to say is, in that the answer to this. So you've just described what you do when you're having a bad day. You've got a go-to. So the way I see it with music therapy is we're just kind of facilitating, we're just making that bridge for someone who can't access that for themselves. Maybe because they are so physically disabled, they can't go and switch on the tune, or they've never learnt to play an instrument, or they're traumatized, or they're stuck in a deep depression and they just can't do that for themselves. But everyone responds to some kind of music. We all have that kind of innate sense of listening, from our gestation, in our mother's wombs. We're hearing a heartbeat, we're hearing a rhythm and a pulse, we're hearing the melody of conversations around us. Our hearing develops when we're like 5 months into gestation, and it's the last sense, I understand, that we lose at the end of our life. So hearing, some kind of residual hearing, is still there. Even for people with a hearing loss, or with some deafness, there's still a kind of residual hearing. There's some areas, some frequencies that they're still able to hear. And so my job is to kind of do that investigation, figure out what they respond to. So, I mean, obviously I have to be just ready to go with whatever. So somebody who's verbal might tell me, well, I love this. So a lot of the teens I work with who are in the care system will say, oh, I love this movie, or, oh, do you know the song from Minecraft, or whatever, they'll name some really obscure pop artist that they've heard on TikTok or something. And if I don't know it, I better go and find out what those chords are pretty quick, but with somebody who's much less able to express themselves, so somebody who's nonverbal, or some of these young guys from other cultures who don't have any English, I just have to kind of go, I have to go with my instinct and just invite them. So we start with something, like a drum and a cymbal, or my internet connection is unstable. That's dodgy. Hopefully it's all right now. Yeah, so something like a drum and a cymbal, and I might just be at the keyboard, or I might have my violin, or I might have my voice, and I'll just kind of figure it out. So all of these studies, that I've done of different musical cultures are really handy if I meet a young person from the Middle East, and I don't speak Arabic, or I don't speak Farsi, or I don't speak Kurdish, but I know something about the musical traditions of those places. So I kind of know that their rhythms are a bit more complicated than a lot of the pop music that we have in Western cultures. So, they're not just going to go, oh, yeah, great, it's, I don't know, it's Taylor Swift or something, because it won't compute for them. So I'll go with something that's maybe more of a Middle Eastern scale, something a bit more melodic or vocal with some drumming. They can join it, and I'll just see what works. And yeah, of course, I'm picking up all those non-verbal cues, or the body language, the eye contact. One of the things that you find with many people who have problems with communication is that they don't make a lot of eye contact with you. So it becomes really significant when they turn around and look at you, or make some kind of sound, or start responding, or start moving their body. Some people have this kind of rocking thing, and they start doing it in time with the music that's you're playing with them. So I always try and get people to join in as much as possible, to make it a real kind of a sense of musical dialogue, a sense of musical companionship. But some of the people I work with are really, really physically disabled, unable to hold anything. So I'll put something that they can just lean into. I mean, I had this one guy a few years ago who just had shoulder movement. So I had some chimes on a stand, and I just put it by his shoulder, and he would just do this, and he could make the chimes make a sound. And so he could control that. He could choose when to do it, when he wanted to. Other people who are more cognitively able and verbal will say, oh, can you teach me to play the guitar? I've got a girl I'm working with right now who she's like, oh, that song, The Chain by Fleetwood Mac? And I'm thinking, yeah. can you teach me the bass line? And I'm thinking, well, I don't play the bass. So, but hey, I've learned it. I can now play that on the guitar.
That's awesome. That's very fun. That's very fun.
Yeah.
I applaud your work. I'm not surprised. I knew a little of this. It's nice to hear more of it. I'm assuming on the website that we'll post that those stories are of just different things that have happened and that give people a sense of what happens. Was there a particular person early on in your therapy journey that like sealed the deal for you? Like it was so. Is anybody pop into your head right now that you could share with us? Because I'd love to hear you tell one of those stories. I don't know how much details are appropriate to share, but whatever you could. You just smiled a little bit when I said that, so I want to know why that smile was there.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of two people, and I don't know if we have time for that, but I'll try and condense. So my first training placement was in a specialist educational facility for basically 4 to 25-year-olds with autism. And, in mainstream school, as I'd been a teacher, I'd met some children with autism spectrum conditions, but I'd never been with so many nonverbal people, and not all of them in that school were. But there was this one guy there who I just had a beautiful moment of connection with. It was like 4 or 5 weeks into the course. And I just thought, this is it. This is what it's about. Because he didn't interact with anyone in his class. He didn't interact with anyone at school. And suddenly he was interacting with me and he was singing with me. And it was just beautiful. So that was a really lovely moment. He must have been about 8 or 9 years old. And, it was great. And then at this day centre where I'm still working, I had my second placement there. And there was a gentleman who just absolutely changed my life. So you need to picture a man in his early 50s with complex needs, with profound and multiple learning disabilities. He had some movement in his feet, but he was in a wheelchair. He couldn't walk. He had no speech. He had very little use of his arms. He suffered from frequent seizures, so he had to wear like a padded helmet. And he didn't really do very much all day. Like, this is a wonderful centre with lots of kind of opportunities for people to come out of wheelchairs and be in more comfortable surroundings. There's gardening, there's pottery, there's woodwork, there's cookery, there's all kinds of sports, and they have all of the appropriate equipment to really get people stimulated and active. But this guy couldn't do a lot of the physical things because of the epilepsy, which was quite severe. So I decided to try some sessions with him. And my tutor said, why don't you try him at the piano? Because he couldn't hold anything. So normally we'd give someone like a drum with a stick or something like that. He couldn't do any of that stuff. But one day we were sat at the piano and he just sat next to me and he did that. He kind of flopped onto the piano like this. And it just made an amazing sound. And he sat up, his eyes were wide open, and he just started humming and singing. And it was incredible. He really smiled at me. And that was the moment I just, I felt like my heart was going to burst. I thought, wow, who knew that this person who is so, so, so limited could have such music could have such an impact and such a responsiveness. And from there, I just started to change the way I worked with him. So I started to expect him to be much more musically active, to be much more kind of a partnership. Instead of me playing music at him, it was really us making music together, sharing a piano, sharing some sounds, sharing our voices. And it was just such a beautiful relationship. So when I finished that placement, I went on somewhere else. But when I started working full time, he was there at the centre. So I got to carry on working with him for a few more years. which was just lovely. He was really the one, I would say. He was the most incredible. Yeah.
Gotcha. I've had this thought multiple times during our chat, and just the way you describe your history and what you do and what you love and your interaction with people. I would say that your musical experience and what you espouse in this is more relational than a lot of times I hear people talking about music. So the music you're talking about, you obviously love music, but it always is tied to how you're relating to the people around you. And like I said, that's not necessarily a surprise, but it did surprise me a little bit of how many ways that came out in the way you were describing things. And I find that I don't typically use this term a lot unless I'm talking to a Brit, but that's lovely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I suppose I see my musical training and all of those experiences I had leading up to this career. Actually now I'm looking at it through the lens of the training I've had and the way I see music impacting people. So I don't know if I would have described it in the same way before. I've always been conscious of that, the way music affects me. But I've really learned how to just share that with other people. And do you know what? It's just such a joy. It's like doubling the reward from that musical experience, because you're not just enjoying making music yourself, but you're also finding something really compelling about the unknown, what's going to come out of making music with this other person. And that makes such a fascinating job and also such an enriching job. It's a really mutually enriching experience, I hope. The clients who can talk to me often tell me about how much they've enjoyed doing music together. But I always kind of point them back to the fact that it wouldn't be happening like this if it wasn't for you, because if it was just me by myself, we wouldn't have reached this end point. And I guess that's, yeah.
I think you've highlighted something that I would have obviously agreed with. I might have been able to articulate, but there's just like an emotional level that I think you've added to that concept in the way you've described it, because I think I'm going to be more cognizant of the interactivity than I normally would be. I think I was just talking recently. Miriam did a concert recently. Fantastic venue, wonderful music, lovely crowd. But the crowd itself did not necessarily respond. The interaction it often felt like when I hear what was just done musically, the amount of response to what was done felt lacking. You know what I mean? That give and take. And then Miriam it doesn't happen all the time, but I mean, Miriam also has this in real life gig, which we call them now, since all the virtual stuff, you've got the online gigs and then your in real life gig. She has one now where she's playing at a cocktail bar where people are there basically to drink and listen to her play and sing. And that's it. But that kind of interaction, it's not just the music, but it's the crowd responding, because they're yelling out stuff and they're clapping and singing along or whatever. Not always, but that interactivity, it feels like it's the relational interactivity seems to come out so much more naturally and organically when it comes to music. And like I said, so many things you've talked about today just kind of highlighted that for me. Like I said, I never would have not said that or agreed with it, but I think you made it a little bit more real today for me, just the way you describe it. So that's very cool.
Great.
So I'm gonna wrap us up. I'm not pretending. I've got other things that I thought, well, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about that. So, maybe sometime in the future we'll do this again if you're up for it.
Yeah.
We can come up with some other topics. Like I said, these initial interviews, I shouldn't say it, they've all been initial interviews so far, but I just like to see where it takes me. I mean, to hear what you say and then back and forth. So I appreciate you taking this much time. It's a little bit later there now.
Yeah, it's okay. We're in the summertime, so.
Did you say you were off tomorrow?
I'm off tomorrow. Yeah, so this is all good.
I hope you get sleep in.
Yeah, me too.
So I am sorry that there was some technology not working today, where I'm able usually to take some of these comments out of the chat window and post them on the screen so that you can enjoy them as well. But some very my mother-in-law was, a moment ago was crying.
Oh,
based on some, and there's been some really nice things said, and so thank you for everybody who's been listening and chatting away, and I appreciate you taking the time. I am not surprised at how much I enjoyed this. I will clean this up. I will edit it, get rid of little hiccups here and there when I hit the wrong button as best I can. And we'll get this posted online. I'll get you a link. We'll add some other stuff for follow-up for people who want to see and hear things if there are things. And in the future, I hope that you might find some of the other interviews we do and you might find them interesting. Because you love music, and these are definitely for that. And our friend from London, earlier, Ollie said something to the effect that where you're performing is only the orchestra meets is only a few miles from me. So maybe I misunderstood. Either there's another place named the same thing in London, or maybe Ollie's not in London like I thought he was, or something.
Okay.
We'll figure that out later. But it's good. It's good to have everybody. Yeah, he's in Dorset. So.
Yeah, Dorset is where I am.
Okay, well, Ollie, I have to reframe my thinking because
Are
at one point,
we neighbors? This is weird.
Well, so you have a wonderful day. I think we're going to go raid somebody here in a second. That's where you take the people that are in your audience and you basically drop them on someone else's active channel, and that's how people find people. So I've never been raided on my channel, but Miriam gets raided a lot. So Anna, thank you for your time. I'm going to when I hit this music and we put the screen up, everybody stay on for a second and say hi to whoever we raid. And appreciate you a lot. Take care. This is all we're doing for today.
Thank you so much. This is fun.
God bless. Thank you very much.
God bless. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.